They said she was too big, too much, too heavy for her own good. From the moment Maria could remember, the whispers trailed after her like shadows. In the village market, the women would look her up and down, their lips curling with judgment. The men would laugh behind her back, thinking she couldn't hear. Even within the walls of her own home, her parents spoke in hushed tones at night, their voices seeping through the cracks of the thin walls. "She eats more than the others," her father would mutter. "She'll never find a husband," her mother would sigh. Maria would lie awake, clutching the thin quilt over her body, wishing she could disappear, or at least shrink into someone easier to love. But Maria wasn't just her body. She was a girl with a booming laugh that could make others smile, with a voice that carried melodies when she sang to herself while tending the garden. She had hands that were strong enough to lift water buckets heavier than her brothers ever bothered with, and a heart soft enough to stop for every stray animal that crossed her path. She dreamed of more, of a life where she was cherished, not despite her size, but because of who she was. Yet every day reality pressed down harder. It was late summer when everything changed. The air was thick with dust, and the fields around her family's house stretched wide and weary. Maria had just finished sweeping the porch when she overheard the voices. She shouldn't have been listening, but curiosity drew her closer to the open window. Her father sat at the table, his face tired, his tone sharp. "We can't keep her here anymore. She's a burden. Always has been," her mother's reply cut like a blade. "No man wants a girl like that. At least if we let Thomas take her, we'll have one less mouth to feed." He offered coin, and Lord knows we need it. Maria froze. Thomas, she knew him, a grim man from a neighboring town with a reputation for drinking too much and speaking little. He wasn't kind, wasn't gentle. Her stomach churned as the meaning sank in. They were going to sell her. Sell her like she was no more than cattle or an old piece of furniture. When she confronted them, her voice shook, but her eyes burned with disbelief. You can't give me away like that. I'm your daughter." Her father didn't even look at her. He stood and walked past, muttering, "You're too much for us to carry." Her mother turned her face to the floor, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. And just like that, the world she thought she belonged to shattered. The next morning, she packed a small bundle of clothes into a worn satchel, her fingers trembling. Every stitch in her dresses, every fray in her shawl, carried memories of her mother's hands when she still cared, when Maria was still just a little girl chasing fireflies in the fields. Those days were gone now. She was led out of the house, her parents avoiding her eyes as though she were already a ghost in their lives. Thomas stood waiting by his wagon, chewing on a stalk of dry grass. His eyes swept over her with a calculating glance, not of admiration, not even of acknowledgement, just weighing her, as if deciding if she was worth the coin he had parted with. Without a word, he jerked his thumb toward the wagon bed. "Climb in!" Maria hesitated, glancing back at the home that had been hers for 20 years. Her chest ached with betrayal, with longing, with a silent scream that no one would ever hear. Then, with her heart heavy as stone, she climbed into the wagon. The road stretched long and dusty ahead of them. The sun beat down, its heat wrapping her in a suffocating blanket. Thomas muttered under his breath about the broken crops, about the price of feed, about everything except her. To him, she wasn't a person to talk to. She was labor. Maria stared at the horizon, her eyes blurring with unshed tears. The wheels of the wagon clattered against the rocks, each bump shaking her body, but what hurt more was the emptiness inside her. Was this all her life would ever be? Was she doomed to be a burden passed from one hand to another? Her chest tightened, and for the first time she let a tear fall openly. There was no point hiding anymore. Then fate intervened. It happened so suddenly she barely had time to brace herself. One of the wagon wheels struck a jagged rock and split with a loud crack. The wagon jolted violently to one side, throwing Maria against the wooden rail. Thomas cursed, leaping down to inspect the damage. He kicked at the wheel, his temper flaring. Maria sat frozen, clutching her satchel, when the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. She looked up, squinting against the sunlight. Out of the shimmering heat came a figure on horseback, a cowboy, tall and broad, with a hat pulled low against the glare. His horse moved gracefully, its hooves drumming a steady rhythm across the hard-packed earth. The cowboy slowed as he approached, his sharp eyes immediately finding Maria. There was no judgment in his gaze, no mockery, only concern. He tipped his hat slightly. "You all right, miss?" Maria opened her mouth, but before she could answer, Thomas barked out, "She's fine. Just a girl too big for her own good. Water fair and square." The words landed heavy in Maria's stomach, but the cowboy's expression changed in an instant. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he swung off his horse. Dust rose around his boots as he strode closer. "You don't own her," he said flatly, his voice like steel. Thomas straightened, puffing out his chest. "Paid good money. She's mine now." The cowboy's stance was calm, but his presence was unshakable. He stepped closer, his hand resting near the leather strap of his saddle. His voice was lower now, more dangerous. "You're gonna take your money and walk away. She's not yours. Not today, not ever." The air between them grew thick. Maria's heart raced as she watched, her breath catching in her throat. No one had ever spoken for her. No one had ever stood between her and cruelty. She wanted to tell the cowboy not to risk it, but her voice refused to come. Thomas sneered, but the fire in the cowboy's eyes made him falter. For a long moment he weighed his options, then cursed under his breath. He yanked the bag of coins from his pocket, shoved it into his vest, and stormed off, muttering about how it wasn't worth the trouble. Silence fell. Maria sat frozen, unsure what to do, what to say. The cowboy turned to her, his face softening, as he removed his hat and pressed it to his chest. His voice gentled, carrying warmth she hadn't felt in years. "Ma'am, you don't deserve that. Not for a second." Her lips trembled, her eyes brimming. Why would you help me?" He stepped closer, extending a hand toward her. His calloused palm was steady, his eyes steady still. And then, with words that would anchor themselves deep in her soul, he spoke softly. "Because I see you, and you're just right for my arms." Maria's tears spilled over, but this time they weren't born of despair. She placed her trembling hand in his, and for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her worth begin to shift. His name was James, though Maria didn't learn it until hours after he pulled her down from that broken wagon. At first, all she knew was the gentleness in his grip and the steadiness of his voice as he guided her toward his horse. She had never ridden so close to someone before, pressed against the solid strength of his chest, her heart racing louder than the steady rhythm of hooves striking the dirt road. The wind carried strands of her hair across her face, and when he reached forward to brush one away so she could see, his touch was careful, never assuming, never cruel. For a woman who had only known roughness and dismissal, that care felt almost unreal. James's ranch sat on the edge of town, quiet and tucked against the rolling hills. A wooden fence framed the land, and cattle grazed lazily under the open sky. His house was simple, not grand, but it radiated something Maria had never felt before: peace. He helped her down from the horse and gestured toward the porch. "You'll be safe here," he said, his tone carrying no expectation, no demand, just reassurance. Maria nodded, clutching her satchel to her chest, unsure whether she should step inside. That first night, she lay awake in a small guest room James had offered her, staring at the wooden beams across the ceiling. The bed was soft, the quilt warm, yet her mind wrestled with questions. Why had he helped her? What did he see in her that no one else ever had? Could she trust this quiet man with the kind eyes? Or was he simply another chapter in a life that had already been written in disappointment? She turned those questions over and over until sleep finally took her. The days that followed brought slow, cautious change. James woke early, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floors as he headed out to tend to the cattle. Maria, driven by a need to contribute, began helping in small ways, sweeping the porch, washing dishes, gathering eggs from the hen house. Each time she offered to help, he never treated her like free labor, never barked orders as her father once had. Instead, he thanked her, his eyes warming as if he truly appreciated her presence. That gratitude, so simple yet so rare in her life, began to plant seeds of something she had long forgotten: belonging. Still, the wounds from her past didn't vanish with kindness alone. At supper one evening, James served a generous portion of stew into her bowl. Maria hesitated, her hand hovering above the spoon. Her stomach growled with hunger, but her memory whispered cruel reminders of her parents scolding her for taking too much, of neighbors laughing when she reached for seconds. Her hand trembled until she slowly set the spoon back down. James noticed immediately. He didn't push, didn't pry. Instead, he gently set down his own spoon, leaning back in his chair. "Maria," he said softly, "food's meant